Good afternoon and welcome to the Engineering Talent Awards nominee interviews. This is a series of webinar interviews led by myself and Fayon Dixon in discussion with those that have been nominated at this year's awards. The Engineering Talent Awards are hosted by Equal Engineers. Equal Engineers are an organisation focused on improving the diversity and inclusion of the engineering industry. The awards were of course due to take place in April, but due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic are now scheduled to take place on the 9th of September. A link to this and all the webinars in the series will be available for sharing once each is complete. In today's webinar, I'm here talking to Dawn Childs of Women's Engineering Society, who is nominated for Small to Medium Enterprise of the Year. The Women's Engineering Society has recently transitioned from a volunteer-led organisation to a not-for-profit SME, responding to the growing demand for their services. WES supports and inspires women to achieve as engineers, scientists, and as leaders. They encourage the education of engineering and support companies with gender and diversity inclusion. Their vision is a nation in which women are as likely as men to choose to study and work in engineering, and one in which there are enough engineers to meet the growing demand. So welcome, Dawn.
Hello.
How are you today?
Yes, great, thank you. Beautiful day out there.
Yeah, the weather helps, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yes, I've said this, but I'm loving your bookcase. Very good choice of background. So to anybody watching, the webinar will be available afterwards to be shared. For the format, basically, I will go through and speak to Dawn, asking her some questions that are pre-prepared. And during the webinar, should you have any questions of your own, there is a Q&A option at the bottom. I love doing the finger thing. So feel free to submit any questions you might have there, and I will get to those at the end. So if you're ready, Dawn, I'm just going to jump right in with the questions.
Go for it.
So what is it that you do as an engineer day to day?
So I'm currently the change director at National Grid, and that's the UK's electricity and gas transmission network. And I've moved there in November, and I'm leading their suite of change programs to enable us to be efficient and effective and deliver for all of our customers and stakeholders going forward.
Fantastic. Wow. And was this always an industry that interested you?
Strangely, no. I only moved to utility sector, as I say, in November. Prior to that, I've been in many jobs, first of which was as an aeronautical engineer within the Royal Air Force, where I've served for 23 years, working on various aircraft types. And I then moved to Gatwick Airport as an engineering director there, civils and infrastructure engineering. And latterly, prior to joining National Grid, I was the engineering director at Merlin Entertainments, in charge of the engineering standards and practices across some 130 theme parks in 27 countries. So engineering wasn't always a passion for me. I sort of stumbled into it because I was good at science and maths at school and wanted to be paid to go to university. So although I've had a wonderful career, it wasn't really by design, it was by accident.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, it's an interesting path. I mean, everyone will obviously, there's a lot on your resume, I think, that's massively interesting, especially the stuff with the Air Force. But personally, as a bit of a roller coaster head, I do find your time at Merlin very, very exciting. But since I should probably move on with my pre-planned questions and not get too bogged down in asking you about roller coasters, as I'm sure everybody probably does, I will move on. Have you ever had to overcome adversity? And if so, can you explain? I know that's a big question.
Yes, there are quite a few points in my career where I've definitely had challenges. Some have been out and out sexism. I even had, during my time in the Air Force, one of my managers saying to me, no, you couldn't possibly do that because you're a girl. which was talking about some sort of technical analysis which my colleagues were doing, and I was keen for some extra work and asked if I could take on some of it, and that was the answer. And other times I've had some challenges where I was actually sacked and dismissed for taking a sort of more empathetic approach to a change program, and my boss wanted immediate results and didn't quite understand, so couldn't quite connect with my logic and thinking, which I think was more because I had a sort of a female empathetic approach to how to deliver, rather than the sort of the quick logic that he wanted to apply. I managed to get him to reverse his decision, but it was a very, very challenging time in my career.
Yeah, using those empathy skills against him to get him to reverse the decision. I like it. Impressive. Well, sometimes you've got to, work with what you've got.
Absolutely.
Impressive. So moving on a little bit, obviously the nomination is very exciting for the Women's Engineering Society. So I mean, I believe last year was your centenary. So
Indeed.
what are your hopes for the next 100 years of the Women's Engineering Society?
Well, it would be absolutely fabulous if, in the nicest possible way, the Women's Engineering Society wasn't needed to try and help there to be as many female engineers or girls aspiring to have engineering careers as there are guys. But if we were simply a networking society for engineers to come together, because it, in the current climate, there just are not enough women engineers. It's sort of 12%. We're missing out on a vast sector of opportunity in terms of skills and talent, and we need more engineers. There's an ongoing demand of over 100,000 engineers a year required, and nearly 80,000 supplementary sort of technical roles needed. And if we're missing out on 50% of the talent pool, that's a big challenge. So yes, I'd like us to exist in a networking capacity and not in a need capacity in the next 100 years.
Wow, so the best success really could be to make yourselves obsolete.
Yes, pretty
It's
much.
bittersweet, but absolutely, yeah. No, I think that's very, very, and it's nice to be so honest about it as well. So why did you enter the Engineering Talent Awards?
It seems like such a great opportunity because this is the inception of the Engineering Talent Awards. So to be at our centenary point and to try and support and be recognised at the point where you're growing and starting a whole new element of engineering awards, it just seemed like a bittersweet moment. And in our centenary year, as we've transitioned to be an SME rather than just a society of volunteers, I thought it would be nice to sort of put ourselves forward.
Fantastic. And just quickly, how has that transition been?
Uh, all transitions are not without their problems, so it has been challenging. But I think the best thing about it is that because we now have a core of staff, we're able to have a much broader reach and to properly involve ourselves in so many more aspects than we previously could. Because all the while you're just relying on volunteers, it's never their day job. So with the best will in the world, people give you their time and it's amazing, but you can never 100% commit to things. Whereas now we can definitely commit to things, and we know we can have a good forward program of events. And importantly, we can work very collegiately with partners to try and help engineering industries and engineering businesses to grow their diversity and talent, and really become more of an engaged colleague rather than just a bunch of volunteers helping on the side.
It sounds like a really exciting time, actually.
Very much so, yes.
Amazing. Well, you mentioned something that I found really interesting, actually, when I was reading through obviously everyone has nomination forms. You mentioned practices like flexible working and how they can really help with gender equality in the workplace. So I was just wondering on that point, surely during the pandemic, we see this possibly more than ever. And do you think, as a second follow-up question, that will make changes perhaps across society going forward in the workplace?
I think it's a really interesting moment, and always you end up with something like a pandemic or something that is a strategic shock to society, helping to move forward with new thinking. And before, flexible working was perceived as something you had to ask for, and almost a sort of the business or any business giving you a little bit of assistance. Whereas I think now the requirement is that people have to be flexible in their working practices to keep businesses going. And so the acknowledgement that flexible working can be massively beneficial for a business has suddenly become far more universal. So I'm really hoping that being able to harness this power of the ability that flexible working can give you, and that the sometimes increases in productivity will allow more women, people with caring needs, and potential work balance issues, or even wanting to work remotely. For example, I'm now liaising with a colleague in Australia who's being able to work with us far more collegiately because of our new working practices that we've adopted. So I'm hoping that this will be massively beneficial going forward for broadening the mind in terms of what flexible working pattern can do for both the business and an individual.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it would be so nice if something positive like that were to come out of this, because I think lots of people in various sectors have been, saying for a long time, that there is the potential here to harness this. And it's a shame that it takes something like a pandemic to really get it moving. But, it would be nice to take something positive.
Absolutely.
So in 2019, you commissioned a census with the Royal Academy of Engineering to look at the main blockers for both men and women during their engineering careers. What did you find?
So we've had some very interesting findings. The report is yet to be published, so I won't steal too much of the thunder.
Yes.
But one of the key takeaways for me that I was surprised by was the fact that our male colleagues shared some of the challenges and blockers that women engineers have. And because this is the first time a survey has given a balance of views from both men and women, it's the first time we've been able to take that data point and really think about why that is. And so from a business perspective, if we're able to put forward more role modeling, mentorships, support, networking, then it can be beneficial both for men and women, and hence improve productivity, improve engagement for the entire workforce.
Wow, that's a great takeaway from that. And was 2019 was actually the first time that any sort of census of that scale had actually been commissioned, wasn't it?
That I'm aware of, and although there have been quite a few studies into challenges for women engineers and the like, this is the first time that we actually sought a balanced view from male engineers and female engineers to be able to do that comparison.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because it gives you much more of a broader background rather than
Yes.
just looking at one area.
And it helps to buff some myths, because there's a lot of sort of preconceived misconceptions that this is just women have these challenges and men have different challenges, when actually challenges are simply challenges and they're shared by everybody to different degrees. And importantly, if we can help to support everybody, then we can build a better world and have a far more productive workforce.
I think that's actually a real key with equality, actually, because it shows that we're not all in our little boxes with our individual problems in the side. Nothing makes us more equal than facing the same problems. So
Absolutely.
that's a really interesting takeaway, I think. I find that fascinating. Um, so quite a big question here, but one that I really like. What would you say to young women who are considering a career in engineering? I mean, it could be right from, sort of school age when they're first looking at perhaps, those subjects, science, maths, or somebody that's perhaps looking maybe at career changing.
I would say you could not get a more challenging, interesting and engaging career. And I think one of the misunderstandings is that engineering can be quite narrow. People think, oh, you need to be scientific, you need to want to design something or build something or fix something. It's far broader than that. There are so many creative aspects, particularly with sustainability and carbon neutral. And for example, in National Grid, we're moving through to the carbon zero economy. So what we really have to have is a massive breadth of people who want to come and engage in engineering activities. So I would say to anybody considering an engineering career, absolutely go for it. Don't be put off by thinking you need to be able to fix things or design things. It is so much broader.
Excellent. I mean, is there a problem, do we think, still in schools with girls not having perhaps STEM careers suggested? I mean, it does seem from, I've obviously done a couple of these now, and it does seem as if that might be changing, which is great. But I mean, do we think that's still a problem?
I think there is still a misconception out there that engineering isn't particularly for girls, and some of it might even be not necessarily the careers advice, which isn't fantastic in schools still, but it might be even the family, because within STEM subjects you sometimes get a misconception that you need to have known about engineering first, and so if you don't have an engineer within your immediate family, they might not think of engineering as a suitable career for girls. So it might be your family and your surrounding network that could be putting you off. So I think it's really important that more girls are engaged and get the opportunity to understand what it could be or couldn't be for them. And in fact, when I was at Merlin, we undertook the IET Faraday Challenge, and we hosted that a couple of years ago. And the competition was to design a roller coaster for Thorpe Park.
Wow.
And they had more girls engaged in that competition. So there were over 50% female participants, which is the first time that there have been more girls than boys engaged in an engineering schools competition. And in fact, it was a girls' school that won the competition. So you add that creative aspect and people understand that engineering can be about creativity. It really does play to things that girls are interested in.
Absolutely, because of course, someone has to come up with all these wonderful things. Disney have a whole, team of people doing this.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, to me, that certainly sparks my imagination. Just quickly, were there any really interesting applicants for those roller coaster designs? I bet you got some really strange.
There was all sorts of things. My favorite one was there was an Oreo roller coaster ride where bits of Oreo were thrown in people's faces and things, which clearly would have been a health and safety risk. But I guess from a design perspective, having large Oreos is quite nice.
Yeah, I mean, I love Oreos. I'm not sure I want them thrown at my face, but why not? Um, um, on that, just really quickly, at your time at Merlin, was there a particular project that you really liked working on that got your sort of, because you seem to be somebody that's, as much a traditional engineer as somebody that's, very, very creative. Was there a project that really sparked your imagination?
So there were two projects that I found really engaging. The first one was replacing a lift system in one of the ski resorts in Australia. So figuring out understanding how you get that new lift system in place and the processes around it, because of course you have to helicopter stuff in because it's up a mountain. So that was really interesting and engaging. And the other one, which I absolutely loved, was the Wicker Man up at Alton Towers. So one of the first new build wooden roller coasters for many, many years, and it's on fire. So wood and fire.
I can't get my head around. It's also on fire. I'm going to take a pilgrimage to this for absolute sure, because I haven't had the pleasure of that yet. I will say, on a personal point, ski lifts terrify me. I mean, I use them because you need to, and I try not to make a fuss, but of all the engineering feats in the world, there is something very strange about hanging from a chair that is on a thin piece of wire that seems to be not even properly attached to the thing above it. So I find those completely terrifying. I think I'm probably not alone either there. So just looking, I've been, again, going through all the sort of wonderful things you mentioned that have been coming up around the centenary and everything. So the Women's Engineering Society actually has the patronage of UNESCO, which seemed interesting to me. How did that come about?
And so my predecessors, one of my predecessors as a president, a lady called Dawn Bonfield, did an awful lot of work to expand the Women's Engineering Society and make international links. And she forged that relationship with UNESCO. And from there, we launched the International Women in Engineering Day, which is on the 23rd of June every year. And that has really broadened out our reach. So getting those sort of links in with international engineering departments in UNESCO has been absolutely transformational for us.
Amazing, what an opportunity. Well, obviously then, Women in Engineering Day, 23rd of June, it's just around the corner. It's less than a month away.
Absolutely. And we have a whole load of online events, and all of our partners are holding events. So in National Grid, we're holding an event. So yeah, they'll all be online, they'll all be virtual, but it will be there.
Is there anything particular out of that sort of schedule that you're really looking forward to?
We have the Women's Engineering Society itself is hosting a webinar for the majority of the afternoon, which I'm opening and closing. So we'll be linking in with many of our partners, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh, amazing, great. Yeah, not long away at all. You mentioned also, this I found really, really interesting, that not just gender specific, but actually across the board, there is really an engineer skills gap, and a demand for engineers. I mean, is that still a real problem? Because I'd never really thought of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. And every single year this is reported on. And the latest figures show that there's over 120,000 job requirements on an annual basis coming forward for engineers. And that's a massive gap. And not only for pure engineers, but for associated jobs, there's a further 80,000 jobs expected annually. So anybody who's looking for a career and looking for employment, I think it's really important that engineering should be one of their considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, when you've got a large skills gap in any sector, really, you're never really reaching your full potential. Because I think all the people that aren't perhaps embarking on a career that they would be right for.
Yes, and all of the technical companies within the UK, 1 in 2 of them say that they're expecting to have a challenge in recruiting engineers. So 50% of the companies.
And so the Women's Engineering Society, I mean, are there things that you're actually doing to really sort of I don't know what the word would be, to recruit?
So we do run advertising for engineers for particular posts, but importantly, we work with companies to try and help them to ensure that their advertising reaches as broad a church as possible. So ensuring they're not putting things in their adverts that maybe put some of the candidates off, so they can attract as many applicants as possible.
I was reading about that actually elsewhere, that really job applications, are very key, and that actually perhaps traditionally lots of mistakes have been made in coming across extremely scientific and extremely sort of science-led and demanding all these vital qualifications. And obviously qualifications are extremely important, but that things can be worded and phrased in a way that can actually be quite off-putting. Have you come across that? Has that been a
Oh,
thing?
absolutely. A lot of definitely engineering adverts can come across as quite male. So using specific words like leading and challenging and sort of quite harsh words rather than softer words, which might maybe appeal to a more female audience. And also there's quite a disconnect between the perceived requirement for graduates rather than perhaps people with college educations or with apprenticeships. So you might put that you want a graduate engineer when actually what you want is a qualified engineer. And so somebody who's had an apprenticeship or gone through the college route would be absolutely perfect for you, but you've already narrowed it down to graduate. So really being very thoughtful about what's in the job advert is important.
Yeah, I've been seeing sort of more and more conversation about that online, and people really looking into that, because of course it's probably across many sectors. I'm sure it's not just engineering by any means, but I think traditionally that's definitely job applications can be extremely formal, and as you say, they can use words that perhaps lend themselves more to a male, or perhaps reverse. I'm sure there are industries that perhaps lend themselves more to a female skill set. But your time as president of the Women's Engineering Society, have there been any particular highlights so far?
Well, so there have been many
question.
highlights.
I love a good big question. On the spot.
And I think we had a fantastic conference at the Royal Air Force Museum last year as one of the sort of launches of our centenary year, and that was really engaging and absolutely fabulous. And we had some great speakers. We had Sue Gray, who's the first female 3-star in the military. So it was great to have her along, and Mandy Hickson, who was one of the first female pilots in the Air Force. So a good Air Force theme running through that entire opening session for our centenary. We've also had some other key events with partners. So this has been the first launch of having proper partners days in the Women's Engineering Society. So some of those have been absolutely amazing, and I think that the thing that I found really engaging was the centenary lunch that we held. So at the Polish Institute in London, we had all former presidents, trustees along to a centenary lunch, and there were some amazing stories, and we thanked all of our forebears who went before us. So it was really brilliant.
Amazing. I mean, I have to say, just personally, reading that the Women's Engineering Society was already 100 years old, that's really quite inspiring, because I mean, it's been around for such a long time, and you think, I mean, gosh, 100 years ago, it seems very forward thinking of them then to have set up the organisation. I mean, at a time when there was so much, society was not as nearly as evolved as we are now, hopefully, with more to come.
Well, no, but it was all triggered by the Great War. So as the men went off to war, clearly they needed to keep industry going, and so women stepped into some of those industrial roles to keep munition factories going and to keep production of all of the elements that were needed for war. And when the men came back from the front line, there was a Restoration of Practices Act, which meant that it was illegal for women to stay in some of these technical roles that they were currently enjoying. So they went from being sort of stepping up into engineering type roles to being pushed back into the home. And that was why it was formed, to try and sort of tip that balance, and to try and encourage more women to be engineers and to take up these great skills that they'd learned.
Wow. I mean, and then was it quite a long period then to sort of, after, I don't know when that law was repealed, but was it quite a slow period to then getting women back into engineering? I mean, that sounds like it must have been quite a long fight.
Yeah, and so if I look at the percentage of female engineers over that sort of century, from our original setup, for the first 50 years, we only went up to 0.5% of practicing engineers being women in the first 50 years. And there was 0.5%. So we then moved forward. And if I reflect back on my first involvement with the Women's Engineering Society, there was actually, when I joined the Air Force, there was about 7% women in engineering. And so that was back in the early 90s. We had in 2016, I think it was, there was a conference which said 9% is not enough. So that had only moved on to 9%. We're now currently at around 12%. So it's, it's very slow progress. If we continue with this progress, it's going to be lots more 100 years before we actually get to parity.
Gosh, let's hope these things gather momentum. So let's hope it doesn't take several more 100 years. I should probably fact check this before I ask, but wasn't the Queen an engineer of some kind during the war? Or have I made that up? The Second World War?
She was a form of I'm going to say maintenance, so car and transport maintenance in the army. Yes.
I mean, so I feel like if it's good enough for Her Majesty, then really we should be moving forward quite faster than that.
Definitely.
So you've mentioned, obviously, you've had an extremely broad career, which I think is fascinating because you seem to have done an awful lot. Is there, I mean, I've already asked about Merlin because that was a really interesting thing for me personally. But I mean, I don't want to, again, use the word highlight because everything is a learning curve and everything's exciting. But for your career personally, as a woman in engineering, have there been any real sort of key benchmark moments where you thought, I'm really, pleased to have achieved this, or it's been really exciting to work on this? As because with any career, there's always a trajectory, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And so I think there are a few key moments in my Air Force career that I've really enjoyed. And so I was the officer commanding the engineering wing at RAF Waddington. So I had all of the intelligence, surveillance, and fleets, so sort of spy planes, I guess, in plain language you would call them. And I think that for me, because I had a large sort of team of engineers working on varied aircraft platforms, that was a real highlight for me and a significant achievement to get selected for that role. I also think the choosing to leave the Air Force, which sounds like it should be a low light, but actually proved to be quite a turning point in my career because prior to that, I felt almost like I was pigeonholed and I had to continue on what we would call a traditional career ladder and keep being promoted. And if you miss your promotion step, then that's you done. So choosing to leave and sort of trusting myself to be able to succeed in a different engineering environment was really quite pivotal for me. And since then, I've made several moves and it almost felt like I was taking back on the ownership of my own career, whereas before I was sort of being managed by the military. So I think those are the sort of the tipping points for me, if you like.
So I think it's a terrible quote, but I think it's a Carpenter song that says, knowing when to leave can be the hardest thing that anyone can learn, which I've always thought was quite a good lyric, actually. And that certainly seems to hold true with what you were saying there.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's really easy to try and rely on other people to manage your career for you. But the only person that can be a judge of what is good for you and right for you is you. So, take advice, understand other people's opinions, but at the end of the day, own your own decisions.
And was it important to you to join the Women's Engineering Society to sort of, give something back and share what you've experienced so much with other women?
Oh, absolutely. So when I was at Gatwick Airport, I was fortunate enough to win an award, a First Woman Award, and because I was the first female head of engineering at an international airport. And on the back of that, I got sort of lots of requests to go and talk at schools and colleges and things. And so I then realised that I could have quite a big influence on people and help to inspire particularly young girls and women into engineering careers. And it was at that stage that the Women's Engineering Society linked in with me and asked me to become a trustee. So it's understanding or realizing that I had a voice and I could be helpful for people to try and help them navigate their careers was quite great to realize. And I guess the culmination of that is becoming the president and really helping to move the messages on.
That's so exciting. It must be great to think that, young girls that you've spoken to in the past, may well go on to have careers in engineering.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think, it could be a word, it could be a sentence, it could be an article they find in a magazine about something, but just that thing that triggers that light bulb moment where they go, you know what, actually, I could do that. It can be massively influential.
Fantastic. I think there's got to be surely a huge sense of worth to that, because it's wonderful to have your own career, but it's lovely to be able to inspire other people.
Oh, definitely. And as we've said, there's a massive engineering skills gap, and we need all the talent we can get. And if women don't become engineers, we're missing out on 50% of the talent.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Dawn, I have to say, possibly in record time, we've blown through all my pre-planned questions. I'm very impressed. We've done very well. Is there anything really about the Women's Engineering Society that you'd like to talk about that I've missed? Because obviously, I've gone through the bits that I particularly personally find interesting, but it's an organisation that's been around for 100 years. So apologies if I've not asked anything.
No, not at all. I think the most important thing that the Women's Engineering Society brings is the ability for women to network, but also to try on for size leadership roles. So one of our key things that we do, we have young members boards, we have other panels, we currently have a council, but they're going to be moving towards being directors working groups, and of course then there's a board of trustees. So it allows female engineers to participate in sort of board level roles and decision making ahead of doing that in their companies. So I think it's an important training element for women engineers as well, in addition to the networking and the events that we hold.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose there aren't many institutions that offer anything like that, to have that sort of practice run.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about trying to ensure that women engineers not only start at the entry level, but then move on through their careers, and we end up with engineering directors who are women, it's really important they get some of that sort of director and leadership type training and experience as they go.
Fantastic. Well, right at that moment, we've had a question come in, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you this. Dawn, is there enough being done, industry and government, to encourage younger women into considering engineering?
So I think there's an awful lot of work done by the professional engineering institutions. And if you go online, and particularly I think it's been quite useful in lockdown, there is a plethora of resources online to engage not just girls, but kids into engineering type activities. So that there is a lot of focus, but I think the challenge has been honing that focus into meaningful results. So if you think, if you Googled young engineers, any other sort of types of online resource you might want, there is tons out there. But if you then look at the impact that all of that effort has had in terms of increasing numbers of not just women engineers, but engineers in total, it's not been significant. So I think being able to hone and target what we're doing and how we're doing it to try and encourage and influence people, and particularly girls, to choose engineering as a career is an important sort of step that we need to take. And I think more role models and the engineering technical resources are lovely, but actually figuring out what will change somebody's mind around taking engineering as a career is an important step that we need to consider.
Yeah, shifting those fundamentals.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Dawn, it's been absolutely lovely to speak to you. I think, as I said, we've blown through everything I wanted to cover and then some. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for several hours about roller coasters, but I think that's probably going to be boring for absolutely everybody else. So thank you ever so much for being with us here today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching, and please do remember to share the link from this webinar. Until then, it's goodbye, and we look forward to finally being able to celebrate the Engineering Talent Awards with you later this year. Bye-bye.